Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Lunchtime Live. Sorry, I had a little hiccup here. My software updated, and then you know how it goes with software updates. But anyway, we are here now, and it is Thursday. Yay! It's Lunchtime Live. Okay, so, okay. There we go. I think I'm up. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Everything look good? Beth, I see you there. Hello. Um, all right. So for those of you who are new here, Lunchtime Live is basically like my video newsletter. And for today's demo, oh, I wanted to make sure. Okay, good. Can you guys hear me? Beth, let me know if you can hear and see me okay. Yes, yay, great. Okay, so it's Lunchtime Live is basically like my video newsletter. And at the end of the video, I do a quick demo on a knitting or crochet technique. For this year, what I've decided to do is I've decided to do a stitch of the week. So for today's demo, the stitch of the week is going to be this one, which is knit moss stitch. Okay. So ooh, that does not look good. At least on my screen it doesn't. That is weird. Okay. Anyway, we will have to figure that out because that doesn't look good at all. But knit moss stitch is the stitch of the week. Okay. So let's get back to my face here. There we go. Okay, so that's what we'll be working on at the end of the video. The sound, if you guys have any comments on the sound, let me know, because I realized today when I was doing some setup, as I was setting up the software that totally reset everything, I realized that the sound from my new camera is actually better, at least on my end, than the sound from the microphone that I was using before. So I've disconnected the microphone and I'm just using the sound straight out of the camera. Go figure. It's a good camera, I guess, but it has good sound on it. So any comments on video or sound, let me know, because everything is new again today, thanks to the new software download. Okay, so back to what's going on at Stitches and Scraps. As I mention things, new posts and patterns and events and all of that, there's links for all of those. If you go into the description on this video, you'll see a link to a blog post. In that blog post, there's a list of everything I'm planning to talk about. So in that blog post, you'll see all the links to everything. So when I mention a pattern or I mention a tutorial or something like that, go to that blog post and all the links are right there. You don't have to look for them or try to search. So what is new this week? The main thing is a new crochet along from the Knitter Knotter, and I got to kick off the crochet along with the first pattern, and that one came out yesterday, and somebody's already made it, and there was issues with gauge, and this actually brings up a really good topic to talk about. So this is the square. And this is just a still picture, so I can't really point anything out, but I wanted to show you this is a shell stitch in Tunisian crochet. And it's basically clusters of stitches together to form this shell, right? Well, for this crochet along, the idea is that all of the squares are going to be made to the same gauge, so that if you find a hook that works for that gauge, you can use that for all the squares in the crochet along. And that is a brilliant idea, and I absolutely love it. The gauge is listed in Tunisian simple stitch. And apparently my Tunisian simple stitches are ridiculously big compared to the rest of the stitches, because I went to try and match that gauge, and they use, like, so the suggested hook is an 8mm hook. I had to drop all the way down to a 4.5mm hook to meet that gauge. And I'm like, you know, I asked my friends, I'm like, am I crazy here? Because, you know, I'm off by almost 3.5mm on this hook size. And they were like, yeah, you're crazy. Nobody uses a 4.5mm hook for Tunisian. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe I just crochet Tunisian really loosely. So I said, okay, great. And I just went with it because that was the hook that got me to the right gauge. The thing is, and this is the part I wanted to talk about, your gauge may vary from stitch to stitch. And apparently mine does. So my Tunisian simple stitches are very big. My Tunisian shell stitches are not necessarily that much bigger. So what's ended up happening is I've used a tighter gauge on the Tunisian shell stitches. And the pattern's fine. The pattern has all the suggestions for, you know, drop down a hook size or change the stitch count so that you can get, you know, fewer shell stitches, but you can still match the 12-inch square and all of that. And everybody's gauge is different, so adjusting is going to happen. But the important thing to note is that just because you match somebody's gauge in one stitch, so for example, you're doing a pattern that's got a gauge listed in single crochet, if the pattern is then, you know, bobbles or double crochet, your gauge may not match in the pattern stitch. And especially in pattern stitches where, like these shells, where you've got decreases and increases, where you've got stitches work together, stitches cinch together, your gauge can vary from stitch to stitch. So it's always best to check your pattern gauge, or to check your gauge in the stitch pattern you're using. And I say this if you are trying to come up with something on your own, because obviously, you know, the gauge you're given in a pattern is the gauge you're given in a pattern. But suppose you're doing a blanket and you want to get a certain size blanket, so you do a gauge swatch and you've decided, oh, I'm going to use ripple stitch, right? Don't do your gauge swatch in double crochet and expect it to translate, even though the ripple stitch may be done in double crochet, because you may personally tighten up when you do the decreases, or you may get wider when you do the increases, or when you do the decreases. You know, you don't know when you're actually doing that stitch, you may have a different gauge. So always do your gauge swatch in the stitch that you're going to be doing. And that is my lecture on gauge for the day. And that's from What Happened with This Square. But that square is available on the website. And the way this cal is working, okay, it's 12-inch squares in Tunisian crochet to make a blanket, obviously, throughout the year, right? Well, you can actually, now the squares are all going to be free somewhere. So like my square is free on my blog. I do have a paid PDF version on Ravelry, but you can actually buy the printable PDF version of all the squares as a bundle. And you won't get them all like today. What'll happen is you'll get the first square, and then every time a new square is added, you'll get an email with, you know, hey, there's a new square available, here it is, you know. So you can buy all of them in advance and just get them sent to you as PDFs every time they come out. And it's much cheaper than trying to buy them individually. So I've got that link in the blog post as well if you're interested in that. The squares are all available for free somewhere. So you don't have to buy them at all. You just might have ads and stuff like that. So again, this is the square. It is a Tunisian shell stitch in 2 colors, and really fun to do, and actually a very quick pattern to memorize too, if you you know, want some TV crocheting. Okay, so that's the Tunisian shell stitch pattern. The next thing that's going on right now is the We Crochet bag along. It's the 2022 bag along on my site, and it's sponsored by We Crochet. And I posted this week and when I say sponsored by We Crochet, I mean they sent me all the yarn and all the prizes for the giveaways. So today I posted the first not today, two days ago, I posted the first giveaway and the materials list for the first pattern. Now I haven't really told you what the first pattern is going to be, but I gave away a couple of hints in the post based on the materials you're going to need. I also put in there, since we're talking about gauge, I also put in there the gauge for the pattern that we're going to be using. The reason I did that is the materials say, you know, this size hook or the hook you need to make gauge. Well, how are you going to know what hook you need to meet gauge if I don't give you the gauge? So you can go ahead and do your gauge swatch and get all ready to go. And the pattern's going to come out on the 15th. And in the meantime, be sure to enter the giveaway as well. So I think this is going to be a really fun crochet along this year. I've set aside, you know, I've like scheduled out to do 2 tutorials for each bag. This one I might do an extra third mini tutorial just because there's one technique I want to show you separate from the larger tutorials. So I might separate that out and do a third little mini tutorial in there. But we'll see. I'll adjust the schedule as needed to get those in. But the first pattern, I said January 15th, I lied. It's January 18th is when the first pattern comes out. The other thing that's coming up, I have a seed stitch scarf. It's a striped seed stitch scarf, basically, pattern that I have all done. I have everything ready for. I just have to write it up, and I've been meaning to get that out. I should get that out this week. So that'll probably be the pattern this week. It's a knit seed stitch scarf. And then for next week, for the Lunchtime Live, now we're doing a stitch every week, right? This week we're doing the moss stitch and knitting. I'm going to alternate between knit and crochet stitches. So this week is knit moss stitch. Next week we're going to do crochet thermal stitch. So I'll show that to you next week. But first this week, let's take a look at the moss stitch. And let's hope my camera behaves a little bit better now. It's not. I wonder what's going on with this. Okay, let's see if I change. Not helping either. All right, let's go there. Give you guys a fuzzy stream here from my camera. So let me check my settings. All right, well, I don't know. I'll have to play with that some more, or maybe go back to the old software. But here is moss stitch. And what I wanted to show you on the moss stitch. It's very similar to seed stitch. I don't know if all of you guys know seed stitch. Hi Janet, good to see you. But seed stitch is an alternating between knit and purl, right? So it's knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. The thing that makes it different from ribbing is that you don't line up all the knits in one row and all the purls in one row, you stagger them. Well, moss stitch is the same thing, but we're not going to stagger on every row. We're going to stagger on every alternate row. So we have 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, and then they alternate across the row, purl, knit, right? So that's the basic structure. There's an echo now, Beth? Okay, oh, I know what to do. Hang on. Okay, so if I go here, and I go to, oh, stop. All right, let me see what's going on here. Sound settings, audio settings. Huh. All right, you got to give me, oh, mute layer. There we go. Okay, is the echo gone, Beth? Can you hear it better? Let me mute this layer too, just, well, I'm not using the layer. Okay. Beth, if there's still an echo, let me know, but I think I fixed it. I muted this layer, so now you should only hear from the previous layer. Everything changed. Everything changed with the new software, and of course it came out this morning. So I might actually switch back to the old version of the software. It was easier to manage. But anyway, so let's go ahead with how to do the moss stitch. Better? Okay, good. Okay, so let's go ahead with how to do the moss stitch. I've cast on here 12 stitches. I want to show you the difference between doing an odd number of stitches and an even number of stitches because it's different. So we're going to start with the odd number of stitches. Sorry, we're going to start with the even number of stitches. And I told you it's just alternating between knits and purls, right? So for this first row, I'm just going to go knit, purl. I'm going to zoom out a bit because I keep going out of frame. There we go. Let's zoom out more. There, that's better. Okay, so knit, purl. Knit, purl, So yeah, what's going on with all the camera stuff is that I use a program called Manycam, which actually allows me to connect my phone camera to show my hands and my webcam to show my face and all the other images that I show and all of that. But they just came out with a new version of their software and I downloaded it and it changed everything and it's not good. But okay, so I've alternated knit, purl, all the way across. There's an even number, so I'm ending with a purl. Hi, Jacqueline. Do you go by Jacqueline or Jackie? Either way, hi. Okay, so that was one row, just knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. So now we're going to do the next row. And remember, I want to stack things, right? So I want to stack the stitches for 2 rows, and then I'm going to shift them. So on this one, I ended with a purl. When I turn that around, that purl is going to look like a knit, right? So I'm going to start with a knit so that I can stack the knit on top of the knit. So for 2 rows, I've started with a knit and done knit, purl, all the way across. Let me get all the way across. And then I'll show you that so far we're basically doing ribbing, right? We're doing ribbing over an even number of stitches because the knits are on top of the knits and the purls are on top of the purls. So there we go. 2 rows of 1-1 ribbing, basically, is what we've done, right? So we have here the knits stacked on top of knits and the purls stacked on top of purls. That's 2 rows. Hi, Anna Marie. Good to see you from Portugal. Wow. You prefer Jacqueline. Okay, I will remember that. Thank you. Okay, so so far we're doing ribbing. Great, nothing to see here, right? Now we're going to switch it up. So for the first 2 rows, I did knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, right? Now I'm going to do purl, knit, purl, knit. So I say that and then I go into knit. Okay, so purl, knit, purl, knit. And I'm going to do that till the end of the row. So it's the same thing, except now I'm knitting on top of the purls and I'm purling on top of the knits. So it's the same thing. I just started with a purl stitch instead of starting with the knit stitch. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to do this without memorizing your rows after I talk to you about how it's different with even and odd numbers. So if you can read your knitting, it ends up being much easier to do this stitch without paying any attention at all. Okay, so notice that I ended on a knit stitch, right? When I did that knit stitch on this side, when I turn it around, it's going to look like a purl stitch on this side, right? So again, I'm starting with a purl. So it's 2 rows starting with knit and then 2 rows starting with purl. And then it just alternates knit, purl, knit, purl. Now I'm going to, at the end of this row, I'm going to do a decrease because I want to show you what it looks like when it's on an odd number of stitches. So I'll drop down from 12 stitches to 11 stitches after we finish this row. So just ignore what I'm doing at the end of the row. Okay, and here I'm just going to purl 2 together because I want 1 less stitch. Okay, so if you look at what we have now, and I'm going to zoom in so you can really see the detail on it. We have, these are our first 2 rows where the knits were stacked on the knits and the purls were stacked on the purls, right? Then we switched for the next 2 rows and the purls are stacked on like these 2 purls are stacked on top of these 2 knits. And that's how you get this alternating structure with the moss stitch. So that's the basic of it. The thing that changes with odd even is what you're starting your rows with. So when we're doing an even number, it's 2 rows that start with knit, 2 rows that start with purl, 2 rows that start with knit, 2 rows that start with purl, so on and so forth, right? When you do an odd number, it's different. when you do an odd number, it goes knit, purl, purl, knit. So let me show you that. Okay, so this was knit, knit, purl, purl. Now let's do, you know what, I wanted the decrease over there. I'm going to decrease at the end of the next row because I want to start this first row with a knit so that you can see that. So let's back this up. Okay. So now we're doing group number 2, but we're going to do it over an odd number of stitches. So I'm going to start just like I started the other one with knit. So knit, purl, all the way down to the end. So row 1 is the same. Row 1 starts with knit. I'm going a little fast here because you guys can pick up the knit and purl alteration, I'm sure. Alternation. Is alternation a word? I think so. Oh, and I wanted to do a decrease here. So I'm going to knit these two together because I want to have an odd number. Okay. So here, my last stitch was a knit stitch. Okay. Before, remember when I did the even number, my last stitch was a purl. So that's what makes this change. Row 1, now that I have an odd number, started with a knit. Row 2 is going to start with a purl because this knit stitch looks like a purl on the other side. So in an even number, we went knit, knit, purl, purl. On an odd number of stitches, we're going knit, purl, purl, knit, as far as the first stitch of the row. The stitches are still going to go knit, purl, across the row. I don't actually pay any attention to that. Like, I don't memorize that. I'm telling you because a lot of patterns write it out that way, that, you know, you memorize this order of rows. But in the end, the best thing to do is read your work. So when I finish this row, I'm going to show you. Okay. So this time I started the first row with a knit, I started the second row with a purl because I had an odd number of stitches. So you have to keep that in mind if you're trying to remember, you know, first row is knit, purl, next row is purl, knit, you know, you got to keep that in mind. But I don't pay attention to that. What I do is I say, okay, I have 2 knit stitches here in a row. I have 2 purl stitches here in a row. So it's time for me to shift things because I only want 2 in a row. So I look at my first stitch, and my first stitch looks like a knit. So I want to shift things. I'm going to purl it. And then once you get your first stitch in, you know you're just alternating knit, purl, knit, purl. And I know that this is the row where I'm shifting things. So this is the row where all my knits are going to end up on top of purls, and all my purls are going to end up on top of knits. Okay, and I alternated knit, purl. Now when I do this row, I'm looking at it and I'm going, okay, well now I only have 1 knit stitch and 1 purl stitch in a row here. So I need to do another, I need to double up on this. So my first stitch looks like a knit, and I'm going to go ahead and knit it. And if you can do that, then you don't have to ever memorize what row you're on, what side of the work you're on, because remember, this is a stitch that's reversible. So if you can't look at it and go, oh, I'm on the wrong side. I mean, you can sort of tell from where the tail is, but even that'll change depending on what cast on you do. So it's easier if you can just look at the stitches and say, okay, this is where I am in the pattern, rather than try to memorize the specific pattern. So, but I will summarize the pattern for you so that if you're writing it down, and I'll probably do a full tutorial on this at some point. I'm thinking actually of putting all these stitches from the Lunchtime Lives together into like a stitch dictionary at some point, but we'll see. That may or may not happen. So there is my moss stitch, and there's the difference between going, you know, on even numbers versus odd numbers. So to recap on an even number of stitches. You're going to do row 1 is going to be knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. Row 2 is going to be knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. So row 1 and 2 are the same thing. Row 3 is going to be purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. And row 4 is going to be purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. So your rows start with knit, then purl, then purl. Okay? If you're doing an odd number of stitches, it's different. It's knit, purl for row 1. Then it's purl, knit for row 2. And then again, purl, knit for row 3. And then knit, purl for row 4. So on an odd number of stitches, rows 1 and 4 are the same, and rows 2 and 3 are the same. So that's the different pattern depending on the number of stitches you have. But in either case, the texture is, here we go, the texture is 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls when we go vertically. So you've got 2 rows that match and 2 rows that are then offset by 1. That's moss stitch. That's all I got for you. So any questions on that? Was that clear? I know that I think the video cut out at some point. Did everybody get all of that? Next week, I'm going to show you the crochet thermal stitch. So stay tuned for that, or tune in for that. And that's it. So if there's no questions, I'm just going to say have a great weekend, and I will see you. Oh wait, Beth. Oh my God, I actually understood that. I love that. I love that. Okay. So I didn't repeat it too many times then. Great. Okay. So, oh, and I should tell you guys, I'm going to start with the really simple knit purl combination stitches for the first few weeks, and then I'll get into more complicated stuff. So through the year, we're going to do lace, we're going to do cables, we're going to do different stitches with increases and decreases and all of that. But for now, I'm just going to say bye. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you next week. Bye.